Okay, I guess we'll get started. People are still trickling in. So aloha, my name is Chris Gallagher, and I'm the moderator for this semi-live session titled "Inspection with a DOT Third-Party Inspector," presented by Claudia Akroyd. Please use the Q&A feature during the video to ask any questions you may have. At the end of the presentation, Claudia will have a few minutes to answer your questions. Claudia Akroyd is a construction inspector with Bowers and Kubota. Claudia is the Department of Transportation Highway Division's independent inspector for contract construction projects and has worked with a stormwater program for DOT highways for over 12 years. She will be discussing several categories of common mistakes found during a construction B&P inspection. Please help me in welcoming Claudia Akroyd. Good morning, Claudia.
Good morning. What I'm going to do first is talk a little bit about the inspection process. Then Chris is going to start a video where we went to various projects that are ongoing to talk about some various features or problems at those projects. You already introduced me. An independent inspector is someone that's a qualified construction inspector. It also is critical that I'm not involved in the day-to-day planning, design, or implementation of the construction project. That's why sometimes when somebody calls me and asks, can you review an amendment or a SWIP before they send it in for approval, I cannot do that. If I do that, I become part of the construction project and no longer independent. Basically, what I'm mandated to do, and this again is dictated by the Oahu MPDS MS4 permit, is to inspect construction projects at least monthly. There are criteria for reducing frequency of inspections. Now, some projects may never be considered for reduced frequency because of their size or complexity. If you think about it, if you have a project which has multiple small sites, every time one of those sites opens up, it kicks in the monthly inspection in order to reduce the frequency. Or a project is so large that when you do the inspection, you come up with several that may seem like very minor deficiencies, but like if you have biosocks ripped up, you have one inlet protection that is falling in, and one vehicle without a drip pan, that's 3 minor deficiencies right there. To reduce the frequency of inspection, basically in a 3-month period, you can't have any projects that have 3 or more minor deficiencies, no critical or major deficiencies, and total for that 3-month period, less than 6 minor deficiencies. So if you have two minor deficiencies for 3 months, it does not go to monthly. If these criteria are satisfied, it can go to quarterly. It will immediately return the monthly inspection if on that quarterly I find 3 or more minor deficiencies or major or critical deficiency. If you have, it can be inspected prior to the quarterly inspection if, for instance, you start a new element of work or a new site is open for construction. These are the types of deficiencies and the definitions of when they're to be corrected. Critical must be fixed by the end of the day, not the next day. So let's hope if we ever find a critical deficiency on a project that we find it early in the day, because if we find it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're going to be putting in some overtime. Both major and minor deficiencies will be corrected within 5 calendar days, not work days, calendar days. This is stipulated by the Oahu permit. And added to that, they should be corrected before the next forecasted rain. Some general facts. Your BMPs must be installed prior to construction. That includes if you have to do clearing and grubbing to put in BMPs, you only clear and grub the amount of area needed to put in the BMP, then go back and finish your clearing and grubbing, not clear and grub the entire area, then put in the BMPs. The installation of the BMPs must be inspected by DOT prior to any element of the work beginning, and that's the pre-construction verification inspection. By element of work, that would also include such things as your water line, anything. About the only thing it doesn't include is when you install the signs for the construction project. They must be installed by manufacturer specifications. It's always good when you're sending your crews out to install BMPs to send the installation instructions with them. And please read the small print, because sometimes there's elements in that you cannot discern from just looking at a picture. You can use any commercially available BMP provided they're appropriate to the situation and install per manufacturer specification. You also must provide a layer effect on the project. Inlet protection is the last element of defense. If you have a project, you still need, even if DOT sends out an email saying pull all the inlet protection, you are still required to keep sediment from reaching that inlet. It does not absolve you of responsibility. So you have to have BMPs upslope of any inlet. If you need to add something to maintain compliance, such as all of a sudden you notice that you've got water running in an area you didn't inspect it, add the BMP and then amend the SWIP. This is the only, in order to maintain your compliance, is the only reason you can have an amendment be put in practice while the approval process starts. If you're making an elective change of a BMP to another type, for instance, your SWIP says you're going to use all sill fence and you decide you want to use biosock instead, you have to have the approved amendment in place prior to making the SWIP. This is not something you can review concurrently with making the change. If you want to remove a BMP, you need an approved amendment to do so, unless it's covered in the SWIP. And the removal must be approved by DOT prior to removal. You should build flexibility into your SWIP for the choices of BMPs to allow you flexibility for the BMPs to fit the situation. If you're talking perimeter control, maybe you want to add biosocks, Filtrat sill socks, sill fence, green gravel bags, that sort of thing. These are the inspection steps I go through. First, I read the SWIP and all permits and amendments. If your project has a 404 permit, read that carefully. That will also dictate some of the BMPs you must install and when you have to install it. An example of why they change from project to project. 2 bridge construction projects on the North Shore, about 2 miles apart. One said the turbidity barriers had to be in the start of construction and remain until construction finished. The bridge 2 miles away, they were only installed at a certain point. I will meet with DOT project staff for project briefing and clarification. Talk about what the project is, what they're now doing, that sort of thing, to make sure I've interpreted the SWIP the way it's intended. I will check on-site documents. First visit, I always check the pre-construction verification report. After that, I ask for the last weekly inspection. This is a check to make sure it's being done. I was not there when you did the inspection, but I look at it. I meet with the contractor should DOT project staff desire. I'm inspecting DOT, not the contractor. However, it is helpful to have the contractor there because they can explain why certain things are the way they are. I walk the site looking at the BMP placement and topography with DOT staff and project staff if available. I'll take pictures of both good and bad. Then I operate the project staff. This is a notification of deficiencies is when they're notified during the inspection. Then I go back and write up the report and try to get it out the same day. Sometimes not till after work hours are over, but it usually goes out the same day. What I inspect, I look at the entire project. I look at the stormwater control. You can look at a project and see where areas where sediment may accumulate or be deposited, where the stormwater typically flows, all discharge points from the site, even if it's not raining. DOH has cited projects for not checking their discharge points when it wasn't raining. You need to check them all the time. All location where stabilization methods have been initiated. And the best time to inspect a project is when it's raining. We get some hellacious rains here from time to time, and I get a call saying, "Are you still coming?" And the answer is yes. When I said that we inspect all disturbed areas, this is the definition of disturbed area straight out of HAR 1155. Inspection strategy. Whether it be me or whether it be DOH or EPA, have an inspection strategy for your project. Determine how you're going to walk that inspector around to see the entire project. Also be upbeat. If an inspector comes to your site and you're sitting there looking all like, gee, I don't have time for this, and you're rolling your eyes, it's going to put the inspector off. Document the inspection with the inspector. Take pictures and notes. If it's DOH, I advise you to take the same picture from the same angle as DOH and take copious notes. You might get my inspection report that day or at the very latest the next morning, but with DOH, sometimes there's a week or two between when they inspect and when you get the report. If you don't have documentation, you're going to be sitting there looking at their pictures and wondering where that's at. If DOH or EPA is out there, don't argue with them. If you have a problem, talk to them. They have probably seen that type of situation somewhere. They won't give you an answer on exactly how to fix it, but in discussions, you might get several ideas of how to fix it. Be upfront and honest. When you look at a project site, you can tell whether something has just collapsed or whether it's been down, and whether or not somebody has gone through and propped up all the silt fence just for the inspection. Don't make excuses. Correct everything as soon as possible. When I talked about inspection strategy, best thing to do, especially in large sites, is have one of the foremen walk with you. So that if they say, "Oh, look, that silt fence is collapsed," somebody can get on the phone and get a crew out there. That shows contractor responsiveness and it gets you brownie points. Document the corrections. Take pictures of the correction as soon as it's done. I advise everybody to timestamp their photos. When you get a DOH report, it's sometimes a week or two after the actual inspection, and they will give you a limited time to create a response. Now, bear in mind when the letter gets down to the project level, it has gone through the DOT, it has gone through the construction engineer, it has gone through the resident engineer, then it goes to the project engineer. You do not have the full time. Whereas if you have the correction pictures in the file, you can just pull them out, put your response together and send them in and be done with it. Don't tell them what you think they want to hear. This can get you into trouble. I was on a project and they were cleaning drains after a heavy rain. There was a lot of mud on the inlet. And when we asked them, did you, when you pulled the inlet protection, did you take all the mud away with it? And they said, oh yeah. And we looked into the drain and there's a big blob of mud down there. Well, since they took all the mud with the inlet protection, obviously we have a critical deficiency. It took a while, but we finally realized, yes, they had dropped mud in there. That's a whole different ball of wax. It would have been, okay, get in there, clean it out, and I'll be back after we'll be back through and take a picture of it cleaned. Okay, we'll take questions after the video, and I turn it back to Chris to start the video.
Well, please let me know via the chat feature if there's any technical issues with the sound or anything like that.
Before I go to any site, I always read and look at the SWIP and any amendments that has it. In the SWIP, not only is it required to have the locations of all the staging areas, it's required to have a layout of the staging area as well. And I will check the actual staging area against those. The other thing the SWIP has is what BMPs are using and also the installation instructions. What I do is when I go out to an inspection, I would do a systematic check of the area. For instance, here, I'm going to go to the curb inlet guard right in front of the SWIP and check to make sure that's installed per manufacturer's specifications. In this case, one of the things I check besides coverage of the drain is that the bags at it are in the right place and they are gravel, not sand, because the manufacturer specifically says no sandbags. I mentioned that I check the curb inlet guard. A couple things I look for on these is one, it's past the opening. Two, that there are gravel bags on the ends, and you can tell if it's a gravel bag just by feeling it. It also needs to be at the overlaps, and I'm also looking to see if it's clean or really impacted. These sometimes clog up very quickly with vegetative matter. After I look at the layout of the staging area, I go into the staging area and I will just systematically go around. For instance, in this staging area, there is one graded inlet here. And in the SWIP, it shows you with detail that they're required to put fabric under the grate and also some type of filtration sock around it. In this case, they've used BioSock. This site actually is just beyond the cabinets where you see the green Filtrex socks. However, the site goes down slope and there's a drain past the end of this site. Projects are required to protect the drains even when they're off-site if they're in close proximity. So there is a drain down there that's protected by Filtrex. As you can see, there's a slight downhill slope from the project site to this inlet. That's why the contractor was required to protect this inlet, because you're responsible for any runoff from the project site, even though this is not in their project area. I will look at the perimeter to see that it is in place. If they're using the Filtrex silk socks, which are the green ones, that they are properly staked. I will check the construction entrance to make sure that it is the right size rock, which is 3 to 6, and there is fabric under the rock. One of the things I mentioned on the construction entrance is it's required to have fabric under the rock, like right here. Inspection 101 tactic. Make sure you leave a piece of the fabric peeking out somewhere to show that it's underneath the construction entrance. Otherwise, we got to dig down to verify that the fabric is under the rock. On every project, you have to have a construction entrance anywhere where you go from dirt to asphalt. However, a lot of times the traditional construction entrance where you've dug down 12 inches, put in the fabric, and put in 3 to 6 inch rock does not work. This is one of those locations because I'm standing on steel plates that are over gas lines. You cannot dig down in this case. So what they've done is used 2 different alternative methods of a construction entrance. First, behind me, they put track out plates. These things will knock the mud off the tires. They will also jar your teeth. So whenever a contractor talks about putting these in, I recommend you put it in so that everybody is forced to go over them. If you just put one in a 2-lane road, they're going to drive around it. The other thing they've done to help with any mud coming off this project is they've installed something that we're just now starting to see in Hawaii. It's called mud mats. It's a fiber with wood slats that go through it, knock some of the mud off, and it should be completed when it goes over the track out plates. In between the 2 mud mats, they plated the area because they do not want a lot of weight on the gas lines. There are other alternative methods that you can use for construction entrance to include geoterra grids, and there are some other products that are just now coming into Hawaii. So if you cannot or don't want to use a rock entrance, search the internet for alternative methods. In any case, you need to install them per manufacturer's instructions. If they have a portable toilet, I will make sure it's secured from tipping over. These things can blow over in the wind, and we have had them blow over in the wind, so they have to be secured from tipping over. You can strap them down, you can stake them down, what have you. Okay, I mentioned porta potties need to be staked down. In this particular case, they used a strap. Very simple, put it over and stake it down with some rebar. Occasionally you find porta potties with holes in the skids, and another method is just to stake down through that. We did have one blow over on H1 several years ago. Fortunately, it blew on its back, it had a trap, and it had just been cleaned. So we were able to check it and nothing discharged from it. If one of these blows over and you do have a discharge, it's not just a water problem, it's a sewage problem, and different agencies are involved. The other thing I will check is if there's any idle equipment in here, whether it has proper drip protection. Occasionally I will find a contractor that parks their equipment on the construction entrance. That is not drip protection because that rock only has fabric under it. If there was a spoil pile here, what I would do is take a look at the spoil pile to make sure it is completely covered with plastic. And I would check all the way around it because the state requirements are that it have protection all the way around it, not just on the downslope side. The perimeter of the staging area is not the protection for the spoil pile. It has to have its own separate spoil pile. The contractor here has a stockpile or a spoil pile. One of the requirements is it can be completely covered and you have perimeter protection 360 degrees around the pile. It would be better if the biosock was pulled out a way to let things pond, but this is sufficient. In relationship to the tree protection zone, you will notice this stockpile is outside the drip line, which is the edge of the canopy. We're here at the Mauna Loa Lighting Project, and
And as most contractors know, sometimes the best place for a staging area is under some of the huge trees like this monkey pod above me. Unfortunately, we have requirements in the BMP manual, and more specifically in the state specifications, section 201, clearing and grubbing, that you cannot park, drive, store equipment, anything under the drip line of trees, especially those over 8 inches. As everybody knows, monkey pods have a tremendous canopy. This contractor, with the approval of the state engineer, found a way around that. He brought in an arborist to examine the monkey pod tree and develop a plan where they could use this area as their staging area. What this arborist did was examine the monkey pod, stipulated where the tree protective zone would be. They erected the orange fence, and they plate the area over the remaining roots. I'm standing on steel plates. The contractor is now allowed to drive back and forth. They cannot park under the monkey pod, but they can use both areas on either side of this tree. We're still on the lighting project. This is an area where they had to trench to put in a box. After they were done, they hydromulched and also installed biosocks around the area. Hydromulch with tactifier does have some soil stabilization, but in a heavy rain, it will erode, and they need to protect the drain down slope. For projects that drain to impaired waters, revegetation needs to start within 7 days of work being completed or not to be worked for a length of time. If it's not impaired, it's 14 days. You also need to water the area. Hydromulching and walking away is not sufficient. You're required to revegetate within 70% of pre-existing vegetation unless there's a landscaping requirement, and then you have to meet that requirement both for coverage and for weed content. Okay, this is a leeward bike path that's being constructed. And one of the unique things about this area is that we're near a stream and there's some wetlands behind us, which means this has to comply with HAR 11-55 Appendix C buffer zone criteria. In those areas where they could not have the 50-foot buffer zone, they had to put double protection 5 feet apart. There's one biosock back here and another one 5 feet apart. And this is because we're very close to the stream, and that bridge is going to be replaced. Obviously, that's in bad shape. Going back to what they've been doing here, initially what they've been doing is potholing down the bike path area. That's because there are both oil and gas lines underneath where the bike path is going to go, and they need to verify how far down they are for when they start grading the area. The SWIP only talked about biosocks or perimeter control on the one side of the project. However, since they were working outside that area and the ground sloped in the opposite direction, they have had to add some biosocks on the other side of the bike path area, where the slope of the land does not go up on that area.
Thank you, Claudia, for your presentation. We're going to open up the question and answer portion of the session now. If anyone has questions for Claudia, please type them in the Q&A feature at this time.
Questions?
No, no questions right just yet. Oh, Kai Nani said, "We just listen. We know you the best."
Thanks, Guy.
Okay, another question for the catch basin inlet protection. The manufacturer states that Tapcon screws can be used in lieu of gravel bags. Is this acceptable, especially for high traffic areas?
That you need to check with the project engineer because you're dealing with state roads. There are some state roads where they will not want you to drive anything into the concrete or the asphalt for fear of degrading the surface. While it is acceptable, it is DOT has to approve you doing that.
Perfect. Okay. Next question. Did we hear correctly that the distributed area needs to be grassed up to 70% of original landscape? Hydro seeding by itself is not acceptable.
Okay, the regulation requires that you revegetate or any disturbed area. Well, you have to stabilize any area disturbed. If you choose to revegetate, it's 70% of the pre-existing vegetation for just simple stabilization of the area. There are other ways to stabilize the area, but if you revegetate, you have to get the grass to grow, which means if there is no immediate water supply, you're going to need to bring water in to get that grass to grow. Um, and looking at the surrounding areas in some of these places, you'll see a lot of brown grass. That brown grass is not dead, it's just dormant. It does not absolve the responsibility to get it growing. Also, it's always good before you move in an area to take pictures before you touch it so that you know what your criteria is for revegetation. It must be attempted and contractor must provide an effort to do it, which means bringing water in if you choose revegetation.
One more question. When using portable concrete barriers, do we have to provide situation barriers to prevent silts from roadway coming in onto the project site during heavy rains?
Okay, concrete barriers, K-rails or Jersey barriers, depending on what part of the country you're from, are not a BMP. They have pick points underneath and they have gaps between them. If you're using them on the perimeter, you need to provide additional perimeter protection if you're trying to prevent sediment from leaving the site. There are a few instances where they have been able to use them as part of the BMP, i.e. they've put fabric over them and biosocks at the bottom to allow for sediment to build up because they're doing a lot of excavation on the hillside, and you know they'll bring it down to the road before they haul it off. But that also needs to be outlined in the SWIP.
Okay. Next one. Is the water from pressure washing rust off rebar next to the ocean in a coffer area required to be removed from area as to not contaminate the area?
Uh, that rust water is contaminated, so it needs to be disposed of as contaminated water.
Okay, another one.
And coffer
SW,
dams are
oh,
not
sorry.
watertight. Sorry.
No. SWIP is an acronym. They're asking is what it stands for.
I think they're referring to SWIP,
Yeah.
which is SW PPP, is Stormwater Pollution Control Plan. That's what we used to always call the old BMP plan.
Hmm. And then Tyson Ashton from Grace Pacific want to let you know that you had a great presentation and very informative. And he's asking, you mentioned time stamping your photos. What is a good app to use for this application?
I'm not sure. I don't use my phone. I use good old Costco Fuji camera that you can set the take timestamp on. But I think there is an app. Just check with any of your techie friends on Apple. I'm told there is a free app that can put picture timestamp on the photos.
Okay, another question. They have a roadway repaving project that includes grading areas along slope shoulders. I believe biosock berms along the graded area perimeter are good enough. At what point is it a requirement to put up silt fences, a slope greater than a certain percent?
There is no percentage that we dictate. You need to judge the area. Biosock is not always the most effective thing. You can use biosock, but take a look at the area, because the criteria for pulling sediment away from the biosock is 1/3 the height of the biosock. So if you're using a 9-inch biosock, you can only accumulate 3 inches of soil against the biosock. If you have a silt fence, you're talking more control and higher area. If you have a steep slope with soft sediment, you're better off with the silt fence. It depends on how much work you want to do each week to correct it.
Okay, back to the grassing question. If the existing conditions do not have vegetation, will hydromulch seeding be enough without watering?
You still need to water. The fact that it didn't have any vegetation, you still need to try to grow vegetation. Your threshold is lower in that it would be contractor best effort if you can't get anything to grow. Consider this: we're spending millions of dollars to revegetate slopes that haven't had any grass on it in the 20 years that I've lived here in Hawaii now.
Okay. Another question, I guess, just to confirm, they're wondering, we remove things that restrict flow before major storms to prevent flooding. Is this true?
That's DOT sometimes sends out emails to their project engineers. Say if we have a pending storm coming in, like some of the hurricanes, it's to remove the inlet protection. This is for safety reasons. You can remove BMPs for safety reasons. However, you are still required to prevent sediment from reaching that drain. You have to have a layered approach, more BMPs upslope from the drain.
Thank you. Another one, do we have to cover guardrails / posts while they're being stored at the staging area awaiting installation?
Yes. When they're accumulated in a pile, they become a point source pollution. We first discovered this years ago on a project where we went by the old steel light poles being removed from a project. And the DOH guy said, why aren't they covered? That's a point source. We said, excuse me? And he said, the galvanized steel is a point source for pollution. So when you have stockpiles, put them on dunnage, put them on pallets, get them off the ground, and put plastic over top of them, put protection around them.
Is there a minimum distance for porta potties from any drainage system?
It should be 50 feet from active streams, whatever. but you should not set them over top of drain or in the close proximity. It's best to put them downslope of any drains and away from work areas. In the event they do get run blown over or hit and fall over. Just use common sense. I will cite something that's sitting on the sidewalk over top of a drain. Move it onto the grass.
Okay. For staging / parking, if gravel is used on previous grassed areas, will the gravel be needed to be removed on topsoil / grass areas once they're restored?
That will be up to DOT to determine how they want the area stabilized. Anyone that travels H1 eastbound near the Pearl City exits or on-ramps will notice a big gravel area there. That was the state had determined that it was okay to put gravel in there at a certain depth, certain size, and that's considered stable. If the area is to be revegetated, they may require that the gravel be removed and topsoil brought in. Part of this is because you don't want gang mowers throwing up gravel. The requirements is something that DOT will determine.
Okay, we got about 3 more minutes left. So there's a few more questions. So a standing galvanized pole is not a point source, yet a lying one is?
Yes. And this goes back to minimization of pollution. Many years ago, an example, I'm gonna use concrete because that's what we were talking about at the time. We can put concrete in the ground for a sidewalk. We can't put the blob beside it of the waste concrete. DOH was in the room when we were discussing this. We threw the question to them and they agreed that would be pollution because we don't have to do it. For telephone poles, galvanized steel poles, we have to put them in the ground for progress. And we know that they have pollutants with them. We do not have to stack them up on the side of the road or in the staging area to have that corrosion or rust or whatever run off them and present a point source. That's when we have to protect it. We're minimizing pollution.
Is it okay to put sand in sandbags when placed in sandy places, such as a beach, or is it required to be gravel?
We've had projects that were working near stream, and DOH Water Branch did not allow anything but gravel bags in the area. They didn't allow biosocks. They didn't allow sandbags because that can get washed into the stream and add particulate matter as it goes down. So I can't answer that on with a definitive answer. It kind of depends on the project and the requirements for that project.
Okay, and the last question, does a permanent porta potty need an NPDES permit?
I have no idea. I'm not sure what a permanent porta potty is. And NPDES permits are usually based on the construction area or whether it's part of a planned area or whatever. So I'm not quite sure what the point of the question is or how to answer that one.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. So thank you again, Claudia. That now concludes this session. Thank you all for attending. The next session will begin at 11 a.m. Please return to the Sessions tab to see the next breakout session. Don't forget to look at the leaderboard to see if you're in the lead. Thank you.